The Huawei Watch 5 did surprisingly well in my testing, at least in some parts, as you'll see in this video. I'll actually start by providing an overview of its key specifications, distinguishing features, and also how it compares to other watches. By the way, for those of you who are new to the channel, my name is Rob and I'm a postdoctoral scientist specializing in biological data analysis. Now, the Huawei Watch 5 is available in two sizes, 42mm and 46mm, each with different material options. I will test the 46mm titanium version today, but I did swap out the standard metal strap for a plasticky rubbery one, which should provide much better fitting during the testing, so it should stay on my wrist much better during cycling, running, and even during sleep. In terms of new technology, the Watch 5 introduces what Huawei calls X-Step. This is sort of a multi-sensor module that integrates blood oxygen, ECG, and PPG sensors for health measurements. The main difference to other smartwatches and other technology out there is that the X-Step sensor is designed for fingertip measurements like this, which could improve the speed of health data collection, at least theoretically, compared to earlier models that relied solely on wrist-based sensing. Now, important health metrics that are supported by the watch include heart rate variability, oxygen saturation, and ECG, with claimed measurement times under 10 seconds for blood oxygen readings. Unfortunately, I have to say this sensor is something I find hard to test in detail in this video, since these are one-off measurements and to get enough data for reliable conclusions was unfortunately not possible given time constraints for me. However, in principle, taking these kinds of measurements at rest should be relatively easy compared to measurements during activities. So I actually want to focus on heart rate tracking, for instance, during activities, which should be much harder than, for instance, tracking your heart rate when you're sitting down, or even oxygen saturation measurement. Though I have to say oxygen saturation measurements can be kind of complicated. I just didn't have time for this video to dive into that. Now, gesture control is another new addition to the watch. With double slide and double tap gestures, users can in that way interact with the device without touching the display. You might know something similar from Apple, for instance. Supported functions include answering calls, music control, and camera activation, adding a level of touchless interaction that was absent from previous watches. Now, in case you want continuous connectivity, you can use eSIM with the Watch 5, so you can use cellular functions without pairing a smartphone. And the battery life for this 46mm version lasts up to 4.5 days on full charge in standard mode and up to 11 days in battery saving mode. For the 42mm version is slightly shorter, with 3 days and 7 days in those two modes respectively. So that's a pretty okay battery life, though of course there are devices out there that last much longer, and for me the battery life is actually quite okay. In summary, I would say the main differences between the Huawei Watch 5 and earlier models are the introduction of that X-Step fingertip multi-sensor technology, new gesture controls, better case materials if you care about that, and compared to some models there's also support for standalone cellular connectivity. But let's now get to the actual testing, which is always the most important part in any of my videos, and the main focus in this video will be on the heart rate tracking, but we'll also take a quick look at the sleep stage tracking and the GPS tracking performance. In terms of heart rate tracking, usually Huawei performs quite well, so let's see if that's also the case for this new Huawei Watch 5. However, the downside of the Huawei Watch 5 is that it's relatively heavy compared to some other Huawei models, which means it might not stay as snug on the wrist as some lighter watches, introducing much more noise in the signal. Let's see if that's the case. I actually tested the Huawei Watch 5 on me, but also on my colleague Rafael to have a second set of independent measurements, so let's get to it. And as always, let's start with one of the easiest exercises for a watch to track indoor cycling. And we'll use the Polar H10 ECG chest strap as a reference, which can generally record my heart rate very accurately. And that's along the horizontal axis right here. And along the vertical axis, we have the measurements according to the Huawei Watch 5, where each dot in this plot is a matching heart rate measurement between the Polar H10 and the Huawei Watch 5. And if the two would agree perfectly, all points should be on or at least close to the blue line. And as you can see, this looks pretty good. Now, I have to admit, I could only do a single indoor cycling session just because of time constraints. That's why I also gave it to Rafael for testing, because I could only do a limited test on myself. But based on this single spinning session, this actually looks really good. The correlation, which is this R value up here, is almost perfect with a rounded value of 1.00. The correlation cannot be higher than 1, so a rounded correlation of 1.00 is pretty much amazing. But let's quickly take a look at the session itself so we can see how well it actually performed. And here we have that spinning session where we can see my heart rate over time with the clock time along the horizontal axis and my heart rate along the vertical axis, with in blue-green the reference and the Huawei Watch 5 in red. And as you can see, the red line according to the Huawei Watch 5 overlaps almost perfectly with the reference device. I don't have much to complain about here. Yes, there are some small deviations like here in the beginning, but this is negligible. This is basically the result we would hope to see. But let's now compare this to the competition. Is this actually good, normal, or actually not as good? Well, you cannot actually get much better than this, but let's see how the competition did. And that's displayed in this overview right here. So that correlation value is the way we will rank the devices. And on the vertical axis, I actually ordered them from worst to best. So the further to the right and the higher a device is, the better is its correlation with the reference device. And we actually see that the Huawei Watch 5 is the top device in this overview. Now there is the small side note here that I only had a single spinning session. So with more spinning sessions, likely some errors would be introduced sometimes. So it might be a tiny bit lower, but it gives a first indication that the Huawei Watch 5 is a pretty good heart rate tracker. But let's zoom in a bit so we can actually read those labels better. And that zoomed in view is displayed right here. So these are just the devices with a correlation of 0.9 or higher. And again, the further to the top right, the better a device. And the Huawei Watch 5 is basically the top performer together with some different Apple Watches. And the Pixel Watch 3 is also very close. So all of them did really well. Also the Huawei Watch Fit 4 Pro did really well, which I think has the same sensor as the Huawei Watch 5. Let me quickly check. I actually do think this might be the same sensor, but I gave the Huawei Watch 4 Pro to another person for testing, so I cannot compare it directly at the moment. But I think they actually have the same sensor. If not, let me know in the comments below that I'm making a mistake here. Overall though, this is a good indication that the heart rate tracking for the Huawei Watch 5 is pretty good when you're cycling indoors. But let's make things a lot more difficult and let's take a look at another exercise, cycling outdoors. Now, cycling outdoors is much harder because there's so much more bumpiness, and given the weight of the Huawei Watch 5, this might actually be an issue. And this is a similar overview to before, but now for cycling outside. And this still looks pretty good. There are moments of deviations though, so it's not as good as before. So right here in the lower heart rate range, there are some points above the blue line. And here in the higher heart rate range, there's a few points below the blue line, indicating that at least some of the time a too high or too low heart rate was detected. Still, a correlation of 0.94 is actually really good, or not bad at all, I would say. But I was only able to do 4 cycling sessions. Rafael actually did a few more cycling sessions with the Huawei Watch 5. In total, he did 16 cycling sessions with the Huawei Watch 5. So let's take a look at those results. And these right here are those results for Rafael. He actually gets a very similar correlation to mine, so 0.92 for him, where I had 0.94. And he also has a few points below the blue line here in the higher heart rate range, but overall looking really good, honestly. But let's take a look at some individual cycling sessions. And here we have one of my bike rides with again the reference in blue-green. And you can see that the Huawei Watch 5 sometimes deviates a bit from the reference device, but it's quite minor. Compared to much of the competition, this is honestly really good. Some minor deviations sometimes, but overall looking pretty good. And if we take a look at Rafael's results, so here we have one of Rafael's bike rides. This looks honestly almost perfect. Also right here, some minor deviations, sometimes detecting a too high heart rate like right here, but overall looking pretty good. Also right here, nothing to complain about. For Rafael, the results are honestly a bit better even than they are for me. So I don't know why the correlation is a bit lower. Well, some of these rides could have something to do with it. Here it's sometimes detected a too low, but also too high heart rate. The deviations weren't big, but they were still there. Also right here. And there's actually 1 or 2 bike rides where the reference had a moment where it showed an issue, like right here. Is there one more? There's just one more that shows an issue out of all, what was it, 16 of them. So what's happening here is that Rafael probably had an issue with his reference device. Maybe he didn't make it wet that day or didn't position it correctly. So the reference kept detecting a steady heart rate because it just lost the signal. And this happens a few times. So we can see that right here. And also during this ride right here, there was an issue here. Let's exclude these two, make a new plot and see if it changes anything, but I don't think anything major will actually change. So sorry for that mistake from before, where for Rafael there were 2 bad reference rides and now I excluded those 2. And the results are a bit better. The correlation went from 0.92 to 0.96, so 0.04 increase, and it's still similar to my results. So on me, the correlation was 0.94, on Rafael it's 0.96. very similar. There are some minor deviations. Sometimes they're slightly too high, sometimes they're slightly too low heart rate. But overall, honestly, really good. And I can prove this to you by looking at how these results compare to the competition out there. And here we have that overview. Again, the better the agreement with the reference device, the more to the top right the device is. And the Huawei Watch 5 is marked in red right here. And it's again among some of the top performers. We can already see there's a lot of Huawei devices quite close to it, but let's zoom in a bit. So that zoomed in view is displayed right here. So these are just the devices with a correlation of 0.8 or higher, so some of the better devices out there. And the Huawei Watch 5 is sort of amongst the second to first tier of devices. It's really close to some other Huawei devices we recently or a while ago tested, like the Huawei Watch Fit 2, 3, 4, 4 Pro, but also the Huawei GT4. Some of these actually have the same sensor as the Huawei Watch 5, I think the 4 Pro for instance, but some of these also have in a way worse sensors, like the Huawei Watch Fit 2 or Huawei Watch Fit 4. However, these are also lighter devices, so these cause less noise on the wrist, and overall that seems to somewhat even out. Now the Apple Watch is doing better than the Huawei Watch 5 than all these Huawei devices, and the Pixel Watch 3 also seems to be doing a little bit better, but generally compared to most of the competition out there, the Huawei Watch 5 is doing really well, also for outdoor cycling. Next, I want to take a look at running outside, and here you can see the results. Now these are the results for Rafael, because at the time of testing I was actually injured a bit. I'm still somewhat injured, so I couldn't do any running at the time. But the results for Rafael look pretty good. The correlation is similar to what we saw for him for cycling outside. It's 0.96, so really good. There's just this moment of deviation right here where the watch for a while detected a too high heart rate. So now I really want to see what's going on here. Is this an actual mistake or did he again have an issue with the reference device? Let's take a look. So Rafael did a total of 3 runs and this run right here looks really good. Basically the red line overlaps perfectly. For this second run here we see some problems. So in the beginning it did really well, but then near the end there are some small deviations and I don't think this was a sensor issue. I could imagine he took a short break here, so that's why his heart rate dropped so much. Or maybe it's a sensor issue, it's hard to say with certainty. And if we look at the last run, this again looks super good. He took a break here in the middle and the Huawei Watch 5 was even able to track many of the details in his heart rate. So for running, at least based on Rafael's results, I can really recommend the Huawei Watch 5. Let's now close off with one of the hardest exercises out there for a watch to track weightlifting. But before continuing, if you want to support the channel, there are different ways of doing that. First of all, subscribing to the channel and liking these videos are a great start. I would really appreciate it. And if you're already subscribed, thanks so much. Now, if you want to support me more, I also have channel memberships. Or if you're gonna buy a device or anything at all on Amazon for that matter, there are different affiliate links down here that provide the best discount possible. Some don't provide a discount, but they still support the channel. And finally, if you're into running, I really like the Runner app for this. I use it myself as a coach for my running, but also to plan my runs. And I get live guidance during my runs. It's the best app for running I've ever tried. So if you're into running or want to get into running, you have a marathon, half marathon, 10K you want to plan for, the Runner app is basically the best app out there, and you can get a 2-week free trial with my link up here or down here. Or if you want to track your glucose levels and you want to find out which foods for you cause big glucose spikes, thereby change your energy levels for instance, I really like the Levels app for this. I use it to track my food and also my glucose levels when I have a CGM attached. You can find an affiliate deal for that up here or down here. Thanks so much for considering any of this, and back to the video. And here we have the results for weightlifting. These are the results on me, and I would say the results look pretty okay, though definitely not great. There are quite a few points above the blue line and also especially below the blue line right here. It's not as bad as we see for some other devices, but a correlation of 0.9 is okay. It's probably not good enough to use the device for weightlifting. But let's also take a look at Rafael's results. Similar to me, Rafael was only able to do a single weightlifting session, but for him the results actually look better. Most of the time the points are really close to the blue line. Only right here was there one moment of deviation. Again, with Rafael, when the deviation is this big, I wonder if there was some issue with the reference. But overall, this looks actually a bit better than for me. But let's take a look at the session itself so we can see if the peaks in heart rate are accurately detected, because that's the major problem normally during weightlifting. And here we have the results for weightlifting on me. And I actually think this was a leg day, which is a bit easier for devices to track. So we have quite high heart rates here in the beginning when I did a leg press. So for weightlifting, my heart rate increasing to 140 or so is quite high. And this, the Huawei Watch 5 was able to track quite accurately. And during the second half of the training, it also did pretty well. But again, this was during leg day, which is by far the easiest one to track. And even there we see some deviations. But what about Rafael's results? Let's have a look. And here we have the results for Rafael. And for him, they are basically perfect. Right here, there's a small deviation. There's a constant line right here. So I'm a bit wondering if in the very beginning he was still adjusting his chest strap. Overall though, for Rafael, the results are pretty convincing. For me, they are not. And I expected if I were to do upper body, the device would struggle a lot more. So in general, if you want to track your heart rate during weightlifting, just use an ECG chest strap. That's by far the best way to go. So those results for heart rate tracking are actually pretty good. I'm not disappointed by them. They're not as good as, for instance, the Apple Watch, but I think only the Apple Watch and the Pixel Watch 3 outperform the Huawei Watch 5. Now there are some other Huawei devices that are basically in the same league, so it's not necessary to get the most expensive watch out there if you want the same heart rate tracking performance. But if you were anyway looking at the Huawei Watch 5, it's not a bad choice. Next, let's take a look at the sleep stage tracking and the GPS tracking. Now for sleep stage tracking, I was only able to collect a single night. I could already clearly see based on the type of patterns of the Huawei Watch 5 that the results are not that great, honestly, but I'll show you that in a second. And I have to do so much testing at the moment, and I recently tested a bunch of Huawei devices which actually have similar sleep stage tracking performance. So I'll quickly show you those results, but honestly this seems to be quite a weak point of the Huawei Watch. Now the GPS tracking was actually very interesting. I had the Rafael test that for me, but first quickly the sleep stage tracking. And here we have that night of sleep. Now as always, I use the ZMax EEG device as my reference device, which can actually measure my brain waves and was specifically designed for sleep stage tracking. And on the bottom we have a similar plot, but now for the Huawei Watch 5. Now the sleep stages are always along the vertical axis and the time of night is along the horizontal axis. And based on the reference device, we can clearly see my sleep cycles. So you go through several sleep cycles each night, each one starting with light sleep and deep sleep and then ending in REM sleep. And you can see I likely had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sleep cycles. I suspect this last part here is actually part of the same sleep cycle and not a separate one, but that's up for debate. And in my opinion, you cannot so clearly see your sleep cycles based on the data from the Huawei Watch. Maybe the first 3 if we're being very generous, but we can already see that the deep sleep detection, for instance, isn't very good. So if I mark the deep sleep as detected by the EEG device in purple, you can see that the overlap of deep sleep just isn't very good. Yes, some of the deep sleep detected by the EEG device was also detected by the Huawei Watch 5, but not all of it is detected and a lot of extra deep sleep is detected. According to the Huawei Watch 5, this night was probably 33% deep sleep and there's no way I had that much deep sleep. Also REM sleep agreement marked here in red, which is quite important for the sleep cycles, only partially matches with the Huawei Watch 5. Yes, as I said, if we're being very generous, we could say that this first part here was shifted a bit, this second one was detected, maybe this third part was detected, and also somewhat this fifth part right here. But overall, if I'm being honest, the patterns just don't match that well. There's too much shifting, too much extra detected, and also too much missing. Now, normally I would put numbers to this and plot an overview of all devices out there, but I think one night just isn't enough to show that. What I do want to show you is how Huawei devices in general perform, because all these devices use the same sleep stage tracking. I actually asked Huawei at some point, and as far as their representative could tell me at the time, all watches use the same sleep stage tracking algorithm, and that algorithm is actually the most important part for determining the performance of the sleep stage tracking. So let's take a look at that overview. And here we have that overview where the better the agreement with the reference device, the more to the top right the device is. Now, as I said, I won't put the Huawei Watch 5 in this overview, but we can see where we can find different Huawei devices. And they're mostly in the bottom left part right here. So for instance, the Huawei Watch Fit 4 I recently tested, the Huawei Watch Fit 4 Pro. We also have the Huawei Watch GT5 Pro, GT4, Huawei Watch Fit 3, and a bunch of different Huawei devices all down here. They're not the absolute worst, at least not all of the time, though some of them are actually quite low right here. So these are some older devices. If you really want good sleep stage tracking, then there's only a few brands out there that provide this. At the moment, the 4 best brands out there are the Apple Watch, which is always on the top right here. Also the 8 Sleep Pod, which is my overall favorite sleep improvement and sleep tracking device. This is a super expensive device, so only get it if you can really afford this. But this device actually actively heats and cools each side of the bed independently and can track your heart rate, your sleep stage, and everything very accurately. This is my favorite device, especially in summer right now. The only reason I get decent sleep is because I can cool my bed and I can actually sleep normally in this kind of summer heat. So if you want the best discount possible, you can use my affiliate link up here or down here. But as I said, only get it if you can really afford it. There's also other devices that do pretty well in sleep stage tracking, like the Oura Ring is pretty good and the Nukoa or Sleep 2 app. Now in the second tier of devices, there are 2 more brands that do pretty well. First of all, different Fitbit and Pixel devices. So Fitbit is owned by Google, so all Pixel watches and Fitbits use the same sleep stage tracking algorithm. All of these are here in the second tier of devices, together with also the Whoop strap. Now the Whoop strap is my favorite overall device if you care about both heart rate tracking, a good app for your data, and sleep stage tracking. Then the Whoop app is really good, but you do need a subscription for this, so that turns some people off. Again, only get it if you can really afford it. There's a discount affiliate link up here and down here for Whoop as well. If you want the cheapest, pretty okay sleep stage tracking, you can also just get a cheap Fitbit Inspire 2, for instance, or an older Fitbit Charge 5. These are not that expensive and you will still get the same sleep tracking as you also get with the Pixel Watch 2, for instance. So that's sleep stage tracking. For me at the moment, I cannot recommend Huawei for sleep stage tracking, so also not the Huawei Watch 5, but heart rate tracking was pretty good. So let's now take a look at GPS tracking. If your sport is either running or cycling, you probably care about your pace being detected accurately or your speed being detected accurately, and GPS tracking is quite important for that. So let's take a look. We're actually going to take a look at Rafael's data in this case, because I only tested it for 4 bike rides, but he for many more. And the way we're going to check if the GPS tracking is any good is by looking at Rafael's commute to work, because he always cycles about the same route. And if the GPS tracking is very good, the signals should overlap a lot. And if they don't overlap, it's much more likely that the GPS tracking isn't very good. So let's have a look. Let's start by looking at 5 times Rafael cycled to work. Now I don't want to dox exactly where he lives, but it seems that most of the time the signal isn't acquired instantly, but pretty fast, maybe 30 seconds or so after starting the workout. But let's now take a look at the consistency between the signals. We have 5 signals right here. One time he had to go somewhere else, it seems. But overall, the consistency between the signals is okay-ish, though definitely not great. For instance, right here, there's quite a big deviation. He's off the bridge according to the signal. Then right here, the signal deviation is also quite present. It's quite okay here, I would say. Also right here is pretty good. Then right here, the device really struggles. I don't know if he's going beneath a bridge or something else, but quite a few of the signals deviate quite a bit here. Then right here, the consistency is okay, I would say. Here, there's quite some deviation. Also right here, it isn't that great. He's quite a bit off the road. Then again, some deviation right here. And when he crosses the bridge right here, it's also not amazing. What do you guys think? Is this good enough GPS tracking? This is the first time I'm looking at this route. Normally I have my own fixed route, so it's difficult to say how other devices would do specifically for this route. But overall, I'm not very convinced. Here it's looking a bit better. I can imagine he took a different route this time than here. Then here again, we have some deviation. Also right here, quite some moments of deviation. Then near the end, it's actually pretty good. I'm not sure what to say about this. I'm not that happy with these results. It's definitely not bad or not terrible at least, but it's also not good. I get the impression that many other devices do a bit better here, especially the more dedicated sports watches like Garmin or Coros likely do a bit better than the Huawei Watch 5. Now I also have 3 times he cycled back from work, so let's also take a look at those. Now cycling back from work, the signal acquisition appears to be a bit mixed. So one time it was immediately acquired, one time it took a bit of time, And either he started the workout late or it was really acquired late. But one time it really took about maybe a third of his way home to acquire the signal. So that's looking less good. In terms of consistency, it's hard to say with just 2 signals here, but there is quite some deviation. Also right here, a lot of deviation. Then here's looking a bit better, but also right here, quite some deviation. And this is not where the roads really go. So there's really something going on here with the GPS signal. Also right here, not looking that good. Here it's more consistent. I don't know if this is an easier part of the route to track. Maybe there's fewer buildings or so, but this looks a bit better. Then right here, I could imagine there are different routes. I think you can actually take different routes here. Then here, this is looking quite good again, and here is almost home. This more or less confirms what I thought before. It's okay, but the deviations I see are sometimes bigger than what I would expect, for instance, from Garmin or Coros. Now, maybe I'm being hypercritical here. It might still be good enough for many of you, but these are the results. Please also compare them to some of my other videos of Garmin or Coros. You can check out in those videos how the GPS signals look there. Overall, a mediocre result, I would say. So those are all the results I wanted to share here. Let me now summarize all of this and give you my final conclusions, but we'll do that in the living room because it's getting quite hot in this room right here. So who should actually get the Huawei Watch 5 and what is my overall conclusion on this device? Well, in terms of heart rate tracking, it was pretty good, about as good as the Huawei Watch Fit 4 or Huawei Watch Fit 4 Pro. So if you just care about the heart rate tracking and you don't care about anything else in the device and you like the Huawei app, then I would say get a Huawei Watch Fit 4 or 4 Pro over the Huawei Watch 5. But I can imagine you might want a circular display or you just like the design of the Huawei Watch 5. Well, then it might be the watch to get for you. So it really depends on if you specifically like the design of the Huawei Watch 5 and you want this sort of round interface. Honestly, myself, I would get a Huawei Watch Fit 4 or 4 Pro. I'm not a particularly big fan of the design of the Huawei Watch 5, and also this X-step sensor isn't something I would use all that much. Now, as for basically all Huawei watches out there, the sleep stage tracking isn't particularly good. So if you're interested in that, look at other devices like a Fitbit, for instance, or an Apple Watch. If you have an 8 sleep pod, you're already set, but as I said, that's super expensive. Though I imagine many of you don't need the sleep stages in particular, but you might already be served well enough by just knowing your total time spent in bed, which is something that the Huawei Watch can track. The GPS tracking was somehow somewhat disappointing. I expected better results. I don't know if there's something with my particular unit or the fact that there's so much metal around which somehow interferes with the GPS signal. If you care about GPS tracking, then probably getting a proper sports watch like a Garmin or a Coros, or for instance the Apple Watch, which also has pretty good GPS tracking. Those are probably better options out there if you really care about tracking your pace and your speed if you're into running or cycling. Overall, I don't think that the Huawei Watch 5 is a bad device. There are just cheaper alternatives out there, even from Huawei themselves, that will give you similar performance. So it's really up to you if you like the form factor, the design, all these kinds of things. Now, if you do end up wanting to get a Huawei Watch 5, a Huawei Watch Fit 4 or 4 Pro, an Oura Ring, a Whoop strap, an 8 sleep pod, another device, or anything at all on Amazon for that matter, even something as small as toilet paper, you want to support the channel and save some money, there are different affiliate links in the description below. They do not cost you any extra and many provide the best discount possible. Now, given that you watched this whole video on the Huawei Watch 5, check out this video on the Huawei Watch Fit 4 Pro or this video on the new Mi Band 10.